I am Katherine Hayes, 32 years old, and the chairwoman of the board for Apex Medical Group. While the world believes I am just a wealthy heiress enjoying a sabbatical, I am actually the one pulling the strings behind the largest private hospital system in New York. I own the building, the equipment, and the very ground the staff walks on. But today, I look like nothing more than a tired traveler. The automatic doors of Apex General hissed open, welcoming me back to New York after a grueling month in Munich. My eyes were burning from jet lag, and my white linen shirt was slightly wrinkled from the 12-hour flight. I had not come here to inspect the books or sit in a boardroom. I had come straight from the airport to see how my husband Mark was managing the empire my father built. I expected professional silence. I expected order. Instead, I walked straight into a circus. A shrill voice pierced the air louder than the announcement system. I looked up just in time to see a blur of pink and gold rushing toward me. She was holding a phone up high, a ring light clipped to the top, walking backward while talking to a screen. "So guys, today I am going to show you the VIP wing where my hubby works," she chirped, oblivious to the world around her. I tried to sidestep, but she pivoted too fast. We collided with a wet, heavy thud. The heat hit me first. A venti-sized cup of steaming latte exploded against my chest, soaking instantly through my white shirt and scalding my skin. The dark brown liquid splattered up to my chin and dripped down onto my travel bag. The heat was shocking, but the reaction from the girl was colder than ice. She did not gasp. She did not apologize. She looked at her phone, then at her blouse, and let out a scream that turned every head in the lobby. "Are you blind, you idiot?" she shrieked, looking at me with pure venom. I stood there feeling the sticky liquid running down my stomach, my expression unmoving. She was young, perhaps 22, dressed in a Gucci skirt that was far too short for a hospital setting and heels that clicked aggressively against the marble floor. "Look at what you did!" she yelled, pointing the camera at me. "This is vintage. Do you have any idea how much this costs? You just ruined my outfit, you clumsy, pathetic nobody." I took a slow breath, wiping a drop of coffee from my jaw. I watched her check her view count, making sure her audience saw her outrage. "I think you ran into me," I said, my voice calm, barely rising above a whisper. "You were walking backward." "Excuse me?" She laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. She stepped closer, invading my personal space, the smell of cloying vanilla perfume mixing with the scent of burnt coffee. "Don't you dare blame me. Look at you. You look like you just rolled out of a dumpster. Who let you in here?" "Security." She snapped her fingers in my face. "You are going to pay for this dry cleaning, and then you are going to get on your knees and apologize to my followers for being a waste of space," she hissed. I stared at her. ID badge. It was flipped backward, but I could see the green lanyard designated for interns. "I suggest you lower your voice," I said, my eyes locking onto hers. "You are in a hospital. There are patients here," she scoffed, flipping her hair back. "I can do whatever I want. Do you know who I am? Do you know who my husband is?" I raised an eyebrow. I was genuinely curious to see how far she would take this lie. "My husband is Mark Thompson," she announced, puffing out her chest. "The CEO of this entire hospital. He runs this place. One word from me, and he will have security drag you out to the curb like the trash you are. You are finished. You hear me? Finished!" The lobby had gone silent. Nurses froze at the reception desk. A few patients lowered their magazines. They were all watching the CEO's wife being threatened by the CEO's mistress, though nobody realized the irony yet. Before we see how this delusional intern's world crumbles when she realizes she is screaming at the owner of the building, hit that subscribe button if you can't stand people who abuse their power. If you have ever dealt with someone who tried to bully you with a title they didn't earn, let me know in the comments. Now watch what happens when I decide to make a phone call. I stood there dripping wet, letting her words hang in the air. Mark Thompson, my husband. The man I had just spent 4 weeks covering for in Europe. My mind flashed back to why I was even in this mess. For the past month, I had been in a windowless conference room in Munich negotiating with German engineers. We needed new MRI machines. Mark was supposed to handle it 6 months ago. He told me he had sent the emails. He told me the deal was done. But when I checked the logs, I found nothing. Just empty folders and missed deadlines, so I went. I did his job while he stayed here supposedly managing the day-to-day operations. Standing in the lobby, I realized what he had actually been managing. I looked past the screaming girl and saw something that made my blood boil even hotter than the coffee. Over by the elevators, a man was on his knees. It was Dr. David Chen, the head of cardiology, and my old friend from medical school. He was not wearing his white coat. He was in his dress shirt, sweating profusely, performing CPR on an elderly man who had collapsed. "Stay with me, come on." David was grunting, counting the compressions. He was ignoring the dirt on his trousers. He was ignoring the hierarchy. He was saving a life. Then I looked back at Tiffany. Just 5 minutes ago, before she hit me, I had seen her outside through the glass doors. She had been screaming at the 60-year-old valet because he took too long to park her convertible. She had thrown her keys at him. The contrast was sickening. David Chen, a man of immense talent, was on the floor saving a life, while this girl whose only qualification was sleeping with my husband was terrorizing the staff and patients. This was what my father's legacy had become, a playground for Mark's vanity projects. "I am waiting," Tiffany sneered, tapping her foot. "Are you deaf?" I said. "Apologize, or I call Mark down here, and he will make sure you never work in this city again." She reached out and shoved my shoulder. It was a light shove meant to demean rather than injure, but it was the final straw. I looked down at her hand on my shoulder. "Don't touch me," I said. She laughed again. "Or what, you will cry. Go ahead, cry for the camera." She raised her hand again, this time aiming for a slap. I saw the muscle in her shoulder tense. She wanted a show. She wanted a viral moment of her putting a peasant in their place. Her hand came down fast, but I was faster. I caught her wrist in midair. My grip was iron tight. I didn't squeeze, I just held it there, stopping her violence with zero effort. "Let go of me!" she shrieked, trying to pull back, but I didn't budge. I looked her dead in the eyes. The playfulness was gone from my face. The fatigue was gone. All that remained was the cold, hard authority of a woman who signs the paychecks for 3,000 employees. "You want to call the CEO?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave. "You want to bring Mark Thompson down here to settle this?" "Yes, call him. He will destroy you," she yelled, struggling against my grip. "Excellent idea," I said. I released her wrist with a sharp push. She stumbled back, rubbing her arm, looking shocked that I had fought back. I reached into my wet pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't search for a contact. Mark was on speed dial number 1. I held the phone up, pressing the speaker button so the entire silent lobby could hear. It rang once. Tiffany crossed her arms, a smug grin returning to her face. "You are so dead. He is going to laugh in your face." It rang a second time, then the click. "Hey, beautiful." Mark's voice boomed through the quiet lobby. It was his charm voice, smooth, slick, the voice he used when he wanted something. "I am in the middle of a pretty intense board meeting, sweetie. Can I call you back in 10? Tiffany's eyes went wide. She looked at the phone, then at me. She recognized the voice, but she was confused. Why was he answering me so sweetly I didn't break eye contact with her? "Mark," I said, my voice flat, "you need to come down to the main lobby, right now." There was a pause on the line. I heard the rustle of papers. "Is everything okay? You sound different. Are you back from Germany already? I thought you landed tonight." "I am here," I said. "And we have a situation." "What kind of situation?" Mark asked, a hint of irritation creeping into his tone. "Katherine, I really can't leave this meeting unless it is an emergency. It is an emergency," I said, stepping closer to Tiffany until she had to take a step back. "Your new wife just threw a gallon of boiling coffee all over me, and she is currently threatening to have security throw me out of my own hospital." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. It lasted for 3 long seconds. Tiffany's mouth fell open. Her phone, which was still recording, lowered slightly. She looked at me, then at the device in my hand, putting the pieces together. "Katherine. He called me Katherine." On the other end of the line, I heard a chair scrape loudly against the floor, followed by the sound of a door being thrown open. "Don't move!" Mark's voice was no longer smooth. It was panicked, breathless. "Don't let anyone touch you. I am coming down." The line went dead. I lowered the phone and looked at the intern. The color was draining from her face so fast, she looked like a ghost under her heavy makeup. "Wife," she whispered, her voice trembling. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "I told you," I said, picking up my bag. "I am Katherine Hayes, and you have made a very, very big mistake." The elevator doors at the far end of the hall dinged. We both turned. Mark was running. He wasn't walking with the dignity of a CEO. He was sprinting. His tie was flapping over his shoulder. Behind him, a trail of confused executives and assistants were trying to keep up. Mark's face was pale. He saw me standing there, my shirt stained brown, my hair slightly messy. Then he saw Tiffany standing next to me in her Gucci skirt, looking like a deer in headlights. He slowed down as he approached, his eyes darting between us. He was calculating. I could see the gears turning in his head. He had kept his mistress and his wife separate for months. He had played the game perfectly. And now the two worlds had just collided in the middle of the busiest room in the building. Tiffany recovered from her shock first. She decided to double down. Denial was her only weapon left. She threw herself at him, bursting into fake tears. "Mark, baby. Thank God you are here." She grabbed his arm, burying her face in his expensive suit. "This crazy woman attacked me. She is lying. She is jealous of us. Tell her who you are. Tell her to get out." The camera was still rolling. The live stream was capturing every second of this. Mark looked down at Tiffany, clinging to him. Then he looked at me. I stood perfectly still. I didn't ask him to choose. I didn't need to. I held the power. I held the deed to the building. I held the bank accounts. Mark was a lot of things: a cheater, a liar, a thief. But he wasn't stupid. He knew that if he sided with the girl, he would be on the street before the sun went down. He made his choice. Mark grabbed Tiffany's arms. I thought he was going to comfort her. Instead, he shoved her. It wasn't a gentle push. He physically shoved her away from him so hard, she stumbled in her high heels and fell onto the polished floor. "Get off me!" Mark roared. The sound echoed off the high ceilings. Tiffany sat on the floor, stunned. Her phone clattered away, landing face up, still filming the ceiling. "Mark, what are you doing?" she whimpered, looking up at him with betrayed eyes. "It is me. Tiffany." "I don't know who you are," Mark shouted, his face turning red. He was sweating now. He turned to the crowd, waving his hands, performing for the audience. "I have never seen this woman before in my life. She is clearly mentally unstable. Security. Where is security?" He rushed over to me, reaching out to touch my arm, but stopping just inches away when he saw the cold look in my eyes. "Katherine, honey." "Oh my God, are you okay?" He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and tried to dab at the coffee stain on my shirt. "I am so sorry. Security should never have let a crazy fan like this into the building. Look at you. You are burned." I looked down at Mark. He was trembling. He was trying to rewrite reality in real time. He was pretending his girlfriend of 6 months, the woman he had given a job to, was a stranger. I looked over at Tiffany. She was still on the floor. She wasn't crying anymore. She was staring at Mark with a look of pure shock. The man she thought was her protector had just thrown her to the wolves to save his own skin. It was pathetic. It was brutal. And it was exactly what I expected. I stepped back, avoiding Mark's touch. "Stop it, Mark," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through his panic like a knife. "Stop acting. It is embarrassing." I walked past him toward Tiffany. I picked up her phone from the floor. The chat on the screen was moving so fast it was a blur. People were commenting, "Wait, isn't that the CEO? He just pushed her. OMG exposed." And I looked down at the girl. "He hits you?" I asked. Tiffany looked up at me. She looked at Mark, who was signaling her with his eyes to shut up. She stood up shaky on her legs. She snatched her phone back from my hand. He said he loved me," she stammered, her voice breaking. "He said you were just a business partner. He said you were cold and barren and he was going to divorce you next month." Mark lunged forward. "That is a lie. She is lying. Get her out of here." I held up a hand, silencing him. I looked at Tiffany. "Well, now you know the truth. He doesn't love you. He loves his position. And he knows that I am the one who gave it to him." I turned to the security guards who had finally arrived. "Escort Miss Jones to the break room and keep her there," I ordered. "Do not let her leave. And someone get me a towel." Then I turned to Mark. "And you," I said, pointing to the elevators. "Boardroom. Now. We are going to have a little chat about who exactly runs this hospital." I didn't wait for an answer. I started walking toward the elevators. I saw Dr. David Chen standing up. He had stabilized the patient. He was wiping sweat from his forehead, watching me. Our eyes met for a brief second. He gave me a small, grim nod. He knew. He had always known. As I stepped into the elevator, leaving a panicked husband and a ruined mistress in my wake, I knew one thing for certain. The coffee stain on my shirt would wash out, but the stain on Mark's career, that was going to be permanent. The golden doors of the executive elevator slid open with a soft chime that felt deafening in the sudden silence of the lobby. For years I had watched Mark practice his entrances. He usually walked with a measured, confident stride, stopping to shake hands, checking his reflection in the glass, ensuring every hair was in place. He treated this hospital like his personal runway. But today, there was no runway. There was only panic. Mark stumbled out of the elevator before the doors had even fully opened. He was not the composed CEO the world knew. His expensive Italian suit jacket was unbuttoned, flapping wildly as he moved. His tie, usually knotted with geometric precision, was slightly askew. Behind him, a trail of confusion followed. 3 junior executives and his personal assistant were practically jogging to keep up with him, their faces pale, clutching clipboards and tablets, as if those thin pieces of plastic could shield them from the disaster unfolding downstairs. I stood perfectly still next to my travel bag. I did not cross my arms. I did not glare. I simply waited. The coffee stain on my white shirt had begun to cool, leaving a sticky, uncomfortable sensation against my skin, but I ignored it. I focused entirely on my husband. Mark stopped dead in the center of the atrium. His chest was heaving. He looked like a man who had run a marathon in dress shoes. His eyes scanned the room wildly, darting past the reception desk, past the security guards, until they locked onto me. The color drained from his face so instantly, it was as if someone had pulled a plug. He froze. I could see the gears grinding in his head. He was looking at my clothes, my messy hair, the travel bag, and the massive dark stain covering my chest. He blinked once, twice, as if trying to clear a hallucination. He had been so sure I was 4,000 miles away in Munich, signing contracts and fixing his mistakes. Seeing me here in the flesh, standing in the lobby of the building I owned, shattered the comfortable reality he had built for himself. But before he could take a step toward me, before he could open his mouth to spin one of his famous lies, the hurricane hit him. "Mark." "Oh, thank God you are finally here." Tiffany launched herself at him. She moved with the desperate entitlement of a child who believes the world revolves around her tantrums. She did not see the terror in his eyes. She did not see the frozen entourage behind him. She only saw her savior. She wrapped her arms around his bicep, pressing her body against his side, effectively trapping him. Her phone was still held high in her other hand, the camera lens pointing directly at his face. The ring light reflected in Mark's wide, terrified eyes. "Baby, you have to help me," she whined, her voice pitching up into a theatrical sob that echoed off the marble walls. "This crazy woman attacked me. She is insane. She ruined my outfit, and then she tried to break my wrist. Look at my arm. Look at it." She shoved her wrist into his face, then turned the phone so her thousands of followers could see the CEO of Apex Medical Group standing next to her. "Tell her who you are, Mark," she demanded, tugging on his sleeve. "Tell this peasant that she picked the wrong girl to mess with. Tell her she is fired. Tell her she is banned." The lobby was suffocatingly quiet. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a car crash. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on the center of the room. Nurses had stopped charting. Patients in wheelchairs had turned around. Even the valets outside were pressing their faces against the glass doors. Mark was paralyzed. He could feel the weight of every stare. He looked down at Tiffany, who was clinging to him like a vine. Then he looked at the phone, realizing for the first time that he was being broadcast live to the internet. "Turn that off," Mark whispered, his voice cracking. What Tiffany asked, blinking her false eyelashes. She didn't lower the phone. Instead, she moved closer, resting her head on his shoulder. "Don't be shy, baby. Tell them. My followers are waiting. They want to see you destroy her." She pointed the camera at me. "See her? That is the one," Tiffany narrated to her audience, zooming in on my face. "The jealous hag who thinks she can touch me. My husband is about to end her whole life. Watch this." I looked straight into the camera lens. I didn't blink. I didn't look away. I let the world see exactly who was standing there. I let them see the calm defiance in my eyes. Mark looked at me. He saw the expression on my face. It was the same expression I wore when I negotiated multi-million-dollar mergers. It was the look that meant I held all the cards, and he was holding nothing but a joker. He tried to pull his arm away from Tiffany, but she held on tighter, digging her manicured nails into his expensive suit fabric. "Mark, why aren't you saying anything?" she asked, a hint of annoyance creeping into her voice. "Why are you looking at her like that? She is a nobody. She is trash. Throw her out." The air in the room grew heavy. The tension was physical. Every employee in that lobby knew exactly who I was. The security guards knew. The older nurses knew. They were watching their CEO being mauled by an intern, while the true owner of the hospital stood 5 feet away, covered in coffee. Mark looked around the room. He saw the faces of his staff. He saw the judgment. He saw the phones raised in the crowd recording him from every angle. He was trapped. On one side, the mistress he had promised the world to. On the other side, the wife who could take the world away from him with a single signature. He began to sweat. Beads of perspiration formed on his forehead, glistening under the harsh lobby lights. He looked like a cornered animal. "Tiffany, please," Mark hissed through gritted teeth, trying to keep his voice low so the microphone wouldn't pick it up. "You need to let go of me. Now." But Tiffany was too deep in her delusion to hear the warning bells. She thought his hesitation was just modesty. She thought he was being too nice. "No, I won't let go until you punish her," she screamed, stomping her Gucci-clad foot. "You promised me, Mark. You said you ran this place. You said you were the king of Apex. Well, act like it." The word king hung in the air, ridiculous and damning. I took a slow step forward. The sound of my flat shoes against the floor was soft, but it made Mark flinch as if I had cracked a whip. "Yes, Mark," I said, my voice smooth and dangerously even. "Why don't you tell us who runs this place? Your intern seems very confused. You wouldn't want to disappoint her audience, would you?" Mark's eyes pleaded with me. He was begging silently, begging me not to do this, begging me to save his dignity. But dignity is something you earn. And Mark had spent his dignity on hotel rooms and lies. He looked back at Tiffany. The realization hit him. She wasn't just an embarrassment anymore. She was an anchor, dragging him down into the deep, dark ocean, and I was the only lifeboat in sight. The live stream comments were scrolling furiously on Tiffany's screen. I could see the reflection of the chat. People were asking why the CEO looked so scared. They were asking why he wasn't kicking me out. The narrative was slipping away from them, and reality was crashing in. Mark took a breath. It was a shaky, shallow breath. His hands balled into fists at his sides. He knew he had to make a choice, and he knew that no matter what he chose, he was going to lose something today. Tiffany looked up at him, her smile faltering for the first time. "Mark, baby." The arrival was over. The performance was about to begin, and Mark Thompson was about to give the worst acting performance of his life. I watched the calculation happen in real time behind Mark's eyes. It was a mathematical equation where the variables were his ego, his bank account, and his survival, and the result was terrified clarity. He looked at Tiffany clinging to his arm like a drowning woman. Then he looked at me standing tall in my coffee-stained shirt, the woman who held the deed to his penthouse, the keys to his Porsche, and the signature required for his 7-figure salary. The choice wasn't about love. It never was with Mark. It was about asset management. And right now, Tiffany Jones was a depreciating asset that threatened to bankrupt him. Tiffany didn't see the shift. She was too busy playing the victim for her audience, convinced that her tears would activate Mark's protective instincts. "Baby, tell her," she sobbed, burying her face deeper into his shoulder. "Tell her she is nothing. Tell her to get on her knees." That was the trigger. Mark didn't just push her away this time. He snapped. The pressure of the public humiliation, the fear of losing his golden ticket, and the sheer irritation of being exposed boiled over into a moment of pure, unadulterated violence. He wrenched his arm free from her grip with such force that she spun around. But he didn't stop there. In a motion that was too fast for anyone to intervene, his hand flew up. The sound of the slap was sickeningly loud. It echoed off the marble walls of the atrium, silencing the whispers of the crowd instantly. It wasn't a theatrical slap. It was the heavy, brutal strike of a man who was trying to destroy evidence. Tiffany cried out a sharp, shocked sound as the force of the blow sent her crashing to the floor. She landed hard on her hip, her hands flying up to cradle her cheek, her eyes wide with disbelief. The lobby gasped as one collective entity. The security guards took a step forward, but hesitated, unsure of what to do when the CEO assaults an intern. Mark stood over her, his chest heaving, his face twisted into a mask of righteous indignation that would have been impressive if it wasn't so horrifying. He was sweating profusely, his hair disheveled, but he pointed a shaking finger at the girl he had been sleeping with for months. "Who do you think you are?" Mark roared, his voice cracking under the strain of his performance. He looked around the room, making eye contact with the nurses, the patients, and finally the camera lens of the phone that lay face up on the floor. "I have never seen this woman before in my life," Mark shouted, his voice booming. "She is deranged. She is a stalker." Tiffany stared up at him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. A red mark was already blooming on her pale cheek, where his ring had caught her skin. "Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling so much it was barely audible. "It is me. It is Tiffany. We had breakfast together. You bought me this coffee." "Liar," Mark screamed, cutting her off before she could give any more details. He kicked her purse away from his feet as if it were contaminated. He turned toward me, his entire demeanor changing instantly. He dropped his hands to his sides, hunching his shoulders in a posture of submission. He looked at me with wide, pleading eyes, trying to convey a message of shared victimhood. "Katherine, darling, I am so sorry you had to be subjected to this," he said, his voice dropping to a sickeningly sweet tone. He gestured grandly toward me, presenting me to the crowd like a prize he was proud of. "This is my wife," he announced to the room, though his eyes never left mine. "This is Katherine Hayes, the most honorable, distinguished woman I know, the owner of this hospital, and this crazy girl thinks she can just walk in here and disrespect her." He looked back down at Tiffany with pure disgust. "You should be in jail." He spat at her. "How dare you claim to know me? How dare you attack my wife? I love my wife. I would never look at a piece of trash like you." I stood there feeling a cold shiver run down my spine. It wasn't fear, it was revulsion. I had known Mark was selfish. I had known he was weak, but I hadn't realized he was capable of this level of cruelty. He wasn't just breaking up with her. He was gaslighting her on a global stage. He was erasing her existence to save his own skin. Tiffany finally broke. The shock wore off, replaced by the crushing weight of betrayal. She didn't scream in anger this time. She wailed. It was a guttural, heartbreaking sound of a young girl realizing she had been used and discarded like a wrapper. "But you said you loved me," she cried, tears streaming down her face, mixing with her mascara. "You said Katherine was a cold fish. You said you were only with her for the money." "Shut up!" Mark lunged at her again, raising his hand as if to strike her a second time. "Security! Get this lunatic out of here!" Mark yelled, looking frantically at the guards. "Why are you just standing there? She is harassing the CEO. She is harassing the chairman. Remove her!" The guards finally moved, but they didn't look happy about it. Two of them stepped between Mark and Tiffany, not to arrest her, but to block him. They had seen enough. On the floor, Tiffany's phone was still broadcasting. I glanced down at the screen. The stream of hearts and emojis had stopped. The chat was moving so fast it was impossible to read individual messages, but the sentiment was clear. The capitalization was aggressive. "He just hit her. Wait. He is lying. That guy is a monster. Record everything." Mark thought he was saving his reputation. He thought that by denying her, he was cleaning the slate. He didn't realize that the internet never forgets. He didn't realize that 5,000 people had just watched a grown man assault a 22-year-old girl to cover up his affair. He thought he was playing the hero defending his wife's honor, But to everyone watching, he looked exactly like what he was, a coward. I looked at Mark's face. He was panting, trying to catch his breath, offering me a shaky, hopeful smile. He actually thought it had worked. He thought that if he hit her hard enough and denied her loud enough, I would believe him. He thought I was that stupid. He took a step toward me, reaching out his hand. "Are you okay, honey?" he asked, ignoring the girl sobbing on the floor behind him. "Let's get you upstairs. Let's get you cleaned up. I will handle this. I will make sure she is charged." I looked at his hand. It was the same hand that had just struck a woman who believed he loved her. The violence hadn't scared me. It had clarified everything. There was no going back from this. There was no counseling. There was no quiet divorce. Mark had just declared war on the truth, and he had done it in my lobby. I didn't take his hand. I didn't step back. I just looked at him with that same eerie calm that he found so unsettling. "You are right, Mark," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "We do need to handle this." I looked past him at the sobbing girl on the floor and then back to the man I had married. "But I don't think you are the one who is going to be doing the handling." I stood there for a long moment, simply breathing. The air in the atrium was thick with the scent of spilled espresso and expensive perfume, now mixed with the sharp metallic tang of fear. I looked at Mark, really looked at him. For the last 10 years, I had convinced myself that his flaws were manageable, that his vanity was just ambition, that his need for approval was just drive. But standing there watching his chest heave, watching the way he wiped his palm on his trousers, as if trying to clean off the physical memory of striking a woman, I felt something inside me wither and die. It wasn't love. It wasn't even anger. It was respect. The last shred of respect I held for my husband evaporated instantly, leaving behind nothing but a cold, heavy pit of disgust. He was smiling at me. It was a tight, terrified, hopeful smile. He actually thought this was going to work. He thought that by physically assaulting the woman he had been sleeping with, he had somehow proved his loyalty to me. He expected me to step into his arms to play the role of the relieved wife, to join him in his sudden, violent condemnation of the girl on the floor. He wanted me to validate his lie. I looked at his outstretched hand. It was trembling slightly. I imagined taking it. I imagined feeling the sweat on his palm. The thought made my stomach turn. Mark took a step closer, his eyes darting nervously to the security guards, then back to me. "Katherine, please," he whispered, the desperation leaking into his voice. "Let's go. People are staring. We don't need to be part of this spectacle." I didn't answer him. I didn't even blink. Instead, I turned my back on him. The gasp from the crowd was audible. To turn your back on the CEO, on your husband in the middle of a crisis, was a statement louder than any scream. Mark let out a small, strangled sound, but he didn't dare grab me. He knew better. I walked toward Tiffany. She was still on the floor, her legs tucked under her in a pose that was no longer provocative but purely defensive. She looked small. The arrogance that had fueled her just minutes ago was gone, replaced by the hollow, shattered look of someone whose entire reality had just been violently deconstructed. Her hand was still pressed to her cheek, her mascara running in dark, jagged rivers down her face. She wasn't looking at the camera anymore. She was staring at the marble floor, trembling. When she saw my shoes approach, she flinched. She curled in on herself, expecting another blow. She expected the wife to finish what the husband had started. It would have been the cliché ending, the scorned wife attacking the mistress while the husband watched. But I wasn't interested in clichés, and I wasn't interested in fighting a 22-year-old girl who was clearly just a pawn in Mark's game. I crouched down. The movement was slow and deliberate. My knees popped slightly. The coffee stain on my shirt was sticky and cold against my skin, a constant reminder of her disrespect, but I pushed it aside. I looked at her directly. "Tiffany," I said. My voice was low. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cruel either. It was the clinical, detached tone of a surgeon assessing a trauma patient. She looked up at me. Her eyes were wide, swimming with tears and confusion. She couldn't understand why I wasn't screaming. She couldn't understand why I wasn't kicking her while she was down. I reached out a hand, She stared at it. It was the same hand that had gripped her wrist earlier, the same hand that signed the checks that kept this hospital running. She hesitated, her breath hitching in her chest. "Take it," I said softly. Mark's voice cut through the air behind me. "Katherine, what are you doing? Don't touch her. She is dangerous. She is sick." I ignored him completely. I didn't even turn my head. I kept my eyes locked on Tiffany. Slowly, shakily, she reached out. Her fingers were cold. She gripped my hand like it was a lifeline. I pulled her up. She was unsteady on her heels, stumbling slightly, but I held her firm. I didn't hug her. I didn't comfort her. I just made her stand on her own 2 feet. I leaned in close enough that the microphone on her phone, which was still lying on the floor recording the ceiling, wouldn't pick up my words. Close enough that only she could hear the truth. "Look at him," I whispered. I turned her slightly, forcing her to face Mark. Mark was standing 10 feet away, looking frantic. He was signaling the guards again, mouthing words, looking like a man whose house was burning down, while he stood there holding a bucket of gasoline. Tiffany blinked, her vision clearing. She looked at the man she had bragged about, the man she had called her husband, the man she had tried to humiliate me for. "Look closely, little girl," I continued, my voice sharp as a scalpel. "That is the man you were so proud of. That is the prize you wanted to win." Tiffany let out a sob, her body shaking. "He didn't hit you because he hates you," I said, delivering the final cut. "He hit you because he loves his job more than he ever loved you. He hit you because he is afraid of me. He is ready to send you to jail, destroy your reputation, and erase you from existence just to keep sitting in that leather chair upstairs." Tiffany's lips parted. She looked at Mark with new eyes. She didn't see a powerful CEO anymore. She saw a coward. She saw a predator who would eat his own young to survive. "Is he worth it?" I asked. "Is he worth the Gucci bag? Is he worth the coffee?" Tiffany shook her head. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it was enough. The illusion was broken. The spell Mark had cast over her with his corporate card and his empty promises was gone. I let go of her arm. She stood there swaying slightly, but she didn't fall. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing the makeup further, but for the first time, she looked real. I turned back to Mark. He was sweating profusely now. He saw the exchange. He saw that I hadn't attacked her. He saw that the narrative he was trying to spin, the crazy stalker versus the united couple, wasn't holding up. "Katherine, honey, listen to me." Mark started taking a step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "You are confused. She has been harassing me for weeks. I didn't want to worry you while you were in Germany. I was trying to protect you." I looked at him. I looked at the way his tie was crooked. I looked at the fear in his eyes that he was trying to mask with concern. I walked toward him. I didn't stop until I was right in his face. I could smell his cologne, the same cologne I had bought him for our anniversary 3 years ago. It smelled like lies now. "Stop acting, Mark," I said. My voice wasn't a whisper this time. It was clear, resonant, carrying through the silent lobby to the reception desk, to the waiting area, to the ears of every employee who had ever been mistreated by him. "The play is over," I said. Mark opened his mouth to speak, to protest, to launch into another monologue about his innocence. I cut him off. "And get out of my way. I have a board meeting to convene, and I believe you are sitting in my chair." I didn't wait for a reaction. I brushed past him, my shoulder checking his, forcing him to take a step back. I walked toward the elevators with my head held high, the coffee stain on my chest, like a badge of honor. I didn't look back at Tiffany. I didn't look back at Mark. I pressed the button for the executive suite. As the doors closed, framing the scene one last time, I saw Mark standing alone in the center of the lobby, looking small, while Tiffany bent down and picked up her phone. She looked at the screen. Then she looked at Mark, and for the first time, she pressed the button to switch the camera from the front view to the back view. She pointed the camera right at him. The elevator doors shut, sealing me in the quiet, cool air of the shaft, leaving the chaos below. The silence was heavy, but it was the silence of clarity. I wasn't a wife anymore. I wasn't a victim. I was the chairman, and I was about to clean house. The silver doors of the executive elevator began to slide shut, slicing away the chaotic scene of the lobby. For a split second, I saw my husband standing alone in the center of the atrium, a man abandoned by his dignity, surrounded by the wreckage of his own making. The silence of the elevator shaft rushed in to greet me, promising the cool, detached sanctuary of the boardroom on the top floor. That was where these things were usually handled. Behind soundproof glass, under the guise of non-disclosure agreements and quiet resignations. That was the civilized way. That was the corporate way. But as the metal doors nearly touched, a surge of cold fury rose in my chest. It wasn't the hot, reactive anger of a scorned wife. It was the icy, calculated rage of a business owner who realizes her legacy is being burned to the ground. If I went upstairs, I was giving him what he wanted: privacy. I was giving him the chance to spin the narrative, to beg, to manipulate, to threaten me with lawyers in a room where no one could hear him scream. By retreating to the boardroom, I was allowing him to keep his mask on for just a little longer. I slammed my hand against the open button. The doors shuddered and retracted with a heavy mechanical groan. I didn't want privacy. I wanted a witness. In fact, I wanted 300 witnesses. I stepped back out into the lobby. The sound of my heels clicking against the granite floor was the only noise in the room. The murmurs died down instantly. Mark looked up, his face flashing with a momentary look of relief. He thought I had reconsidered. He thought I was coming back to save him from the public humiliation. He took a step toward me, wiping a bead of sweat from his upper lip, his eyes pleading for a truce. "Katherine, thank God," he breathed, his voice trembling with false gratitude. "Let's go. My office. We can talk about this like adults." I stopped 10 feet away from him. I didn't look at his outstretched hand. I looked at the crowd. I saw the faces of the nurses who had been denied overtime pay. I saw the patients waiting on stretchers because we were short-staffed. I saw the security guards who were wearing uniforms that were 2 years old because the budget for new ones had been slashed, no Mark Y said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the cavernous silence of the lobby it carried like a bell. "We are not going to your office. We are not going to hide behind mahogany doors and lawyers." Mark froze. "Katherine, please. This is a private matter. It is a corporate matter," I corrected him. "You turned my hospital into a stage for your affair. You made it public. So we are going to finish it publicly. Consider this an emergency board meeting, and everyone here is invited." Mark's face went gray. He looked around at the sea of phones pointed at him. He realized too late that the courtroom had shifted. He wasn't in charge here. Before he could speak, before he could weave another lie to save his skin, a shadow fell over him. "It is a corporate matter indeed," a deep voice boomed from the side of the room. We all turned. "Doctor." David Chen was walking toward us from the emergency wing. He looked like a warrior walking off a battlefield. His blue dress shirt was rumpled and stained with sweat. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms tense with adrenaline. He had just saved a man's life on the floor of this very lobby, and he carried that energy with him. But in his hands, he didn't hold medical instruments. He held a thick black leather binder. David walked with a heavy, purposeful stride. The crowd parted for him instinctively. He didn't look at Mark. He didn't look at the sobbing intern on the floor. He looked at me. His eyes were dark and serious, filled with a mixture of professional duty and personal protection. He came to a stop right next to me, turning his body slightly to shield me from Mark, standing like a guardian statue. "I took the liberty of printing the audit logs you requested," Madam Chairwoman, David said. His voice was steady, grounded, the complete opposite of Mark's frantic pitch. Mark stared at the binder in David's hand. He recognized it. It was the master file from the finance department, the one encrypted under the highest security clearance. David Mark warned, his voice shaking, with a mix of fear and authority that no longer worked. "You are crossing a line. You are a doctor. Go back to your patients. You have no right to access those files." "My patient is stable," David replied, his tone cutting, which is a miracle considering the defibrillator I had to use was scheduled for replacement 3 years ago. The battery barely held a charge. David took a step forward, closing the distance between him and Mark. Mark shrank back, intimidated by the sheer physical presence of the man he had spent years trying to marginalize. I have every right, Mark, because while you were playing house with your intern, I was trying to keep people alive with equipment that is falling apart, and today I found out why. David opened the binder. He didn't whisper. He didn't hand it to me to read silently. He held it up, turning the pages so that the light from the atrium chandelier hit the documents clearly. For the past month, Katherine Hayes has been in Germany, David announced to the lobby. He was addressing the staff now, not Mark. She has been working 18-hour days negotiating with suppliers to lower the cost of new ventilators and MRI machines for this hospital. She sent the contracts back to New York for final approval. She did her job. He pulled a sheet of paper from the file, the sound of the crisp page turning echoing in the silence. But those contracts were never signed, David said. Instead, while Katherine was away, 3 purchase orders were generated right here in this building. They were for ventilators. Top of the line, the best money can buy. A murmur went through the crowd. The staff looked at each other confused. There were no new ventilators. They had been taping the old ones together for months. $5 million. David read the number out loud, letting the weight of the figure crash down on the room. $5 million authorized for immediate wire transfer to a vendor called Apex Solutions Logistics. Mark lunged forward, desperation taking over his senses. That is confidential data. Security, stop him. He is violating privacy laws. The security guards shifted their weight, but they didn't move to stop David. They looked at me. I gave a subtle shake of my head. They stayed put. They wanted to hear this too. David didn't even flinch at Mark's outburst. He simply turned the page. It sounds legitimate, doesn't it, David asked the room. Apex Solutions, a logistics partner. That is what Mark told the board. That is what he told the auditors. He held up a bank transfer record. The ink was red. But I checked the vendor registration. David said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. There is no warehouse. There are no trucks. There are no ventilators coming. Apex Solutions is a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands 3 weeks ago. Mark was hyperventilating now. He was pulling at his collar looking for an exit, but the crowd had formed a tight circle around us. There was nowhere to go. It is a clerical error, Mark stammered, sweat dripping down his nose. I can explain. It is a holding fund for future purchases. You don't understand corporate finance, David. You are just a doctor. Stick to cutting people open. I understand theft, David said calmly. And I understand how to trace a routing number. David looked down at the girl on the floor. Tiffany had stopped crying. She was looking up at the binder, listening to the numbers, her face a mask of confusion. The $5 million didn't stay in the Cayman Islands, David said. It was transferred 24 hours later into a private savings account, an account that was opened on the same day the contracts were signed. He looked at Tiffany. And the name on that account isn't Mark Thompson. The room held its breath. The account holder is listed as T. Jones, David said. He let the name hang in the air for a second, letting the implications sink in. Tiffany Jones. The gasp from the crowd was audible. It started as a ripple and turned into a wave of shock. All eyes turned to the intern on the floor. Tiffany's mouth fell open. She looked from David to Mark, her eyes wide with genuine horror. She hadn't known, or if she had, she hadn't understood the scale of it. I didn't... Tiffany stammered, her voice high and thin. Mark, tell them, she screamed at him, scrambling to her feet. Tell them it is not true. But Mark couldn't speak. He was white as a sheet. He asked for my passport, Tiffany whispered, turning to look at me, her hands shaking. He said we were going on a trip. He said he needed my information to book the flights. He said he was setting up a trust fund for our future. A trust fund, David scoffed, slamming the binder shut. The sound was like a gavel striking a podium. He used your identity to launder $5 million of stolen hospital funds. He signed fake contracts for life-saving equipment that we desperately need, and he funneled the cash directly into an account under your name so that if he got caught, you would be the one going to federal prison, not him. Tiffany let out a choked sound, clutching her chest. She looked at Mark with a look of pure betrayal that was far more painful than the slap he had given her earlier. He hadn't just used her for sex. He had framed her. He had set her up to take the fall for a felony that carried a 20-year sentence. You aren't just a mistress, Tiffany, David said, his voice hard. You are an accomplice to grand larceny. Then David turned his full attention to Mark. He stepped closer, towering over the cowering CEO. "And you," David said, his voice dripping with disgust, "you didn't just cheat on your wife. You didn't just lie to the board. You stole from the sick. You let patients wait in agony on broken machines so you could stash $5 million in a getaway fund. You compromised the safety of every single person in this building." I stepped forward. I moved out from behind David's protection. The evidence was laid bare. The court had heard the testimony. It was time for the judge to pass the sentence. I looked at Mark. He was finished. He wasn't the CEO anymore. He was a criminal. The lobby wasn't a lobby anymore. It was the scene of the crime. "Mark," I said softly. He looked at me, his eyes dead. "The board meeting is adjourned." I looked at the binder in David's hand, and then I looked at my husband. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, and it made me sick to my stomach. For 4 weeks, I had been waking up at 5 in the morning in a cold hotel room in Munich. I had spent hours arguing with German engineers, negotiating down to the last cent, trying to secure the absolute best MRI technology for our neurology department. I had missed meals. I had missed sleep. I had done it because I believed that Apex Medical stood for excellence. I looked at Mark. He was sweating so much his shirt was clinging to his chest. "So that explains it," I said, my voice cutting through the silence of the lobby. I took a step closer to him. "That explains why the emails from the German suppliers stopped coming. That explains why you told me there was a delay in shipping. That explains why you told me to stay in Europe for an extra week." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "I was over there fighting to save this hospital money, and you were back here canceling my orders." Mark opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. "You didn't buy the German machines, did you?" I asked, not waiting for an answer. "You canceled the contracts I worked on, and instead you bought used equipment. You bought garbage. You bought refurbished junk from bankrupt clinics, painted it white, slapped an Apex sticker on it, and charged the hospital the full price for brand new inventory." I looked down at the binder again, and the difference. The millions of dollars between the price of the junk you bought and the price of the new machines we paid for, that went right into the pocket of your little girlfriend. I looked at Tiffany. She was staring at her shoes, her hands trembling. She looked like she was about to be sick. David stepped forward again. The anger radiating off him was palpable. It wasn't the cold anger I felt. It was hot. It was the fury of a doctor who had almost lost a patient because of greed. He turned toward the emergency bay doors, where a stretcher was still waiting. The paramedics hadn't moved it yet. On the stretcher lay an elderly man hooked up to portable monitors, his face pale and gray. "Do you see that man?" David asked, pointing a steady finger at the patient. Mark refused to look. He stared at the floor. "Look at him!" David shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. Mark flinched and looked up. "That is Mr. Henderson," David said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "He came in 20 minutes ago in cardiac arrest. He is a grandfather. He is a retired teacher. He has 3 grandchildren waiting for him outside." David walked over to a crash cart that was parked near the stretcher. He grabbed the defibrillator handles. They looked shiny. They looked new. "When he flatlined, I went for this," David said, holding up the paddles. "This is one of the new units you signed off on last week, Mark. The paperwork says it is brand new. The paperwork says it cost $40,000. David dropped the paddles back onto the cart with a loud clatter. "But when I pressed the charge button, do you know what happened?" The lobby was dead silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to have stopped. "Nothing," David whispered. "Absolutely nothing." The battery indicator said full, but the capacitor wouldn't hold a charge. The internal wiring was corroded. "This isn't a new machine. It is a 20-year-old piece of scrap metal that you polished up and sold to us as state-of-the-art." David walked back to Mark, invading his personal space. "I had to do chest compressions for 6 minutes straight, while a nurse ran to the 3rd floor to find a backup machine that actually worked. 6 minutes, Mark. Do you know what happens to the human brain after 6 minutes without oxygen?" Mark took a step back, hitting the wall of the elevator bank. There was nowhere left to run. "Mr. Henderson is alive by luck," David said. "Pure luck, and the strength of my team. He isn't alive because of you. If it were up to you, he would be dead right now." David turned slowly toward Tiffany. She was hugging herself, trying to make herself small. He pointed at the handbag lying on the floor next to her. It was the bag she had been so worried about when she spilled the coffee. "You like that bag?" David asked her. "It is a Birkin, isn't it? $10,000? Tiffany didn't answer. Tears were streaming down her face. David pointed back at the patient on the stretcher. "That bag cost that man his heart function. That vacation you took to Cabo last week, that cost us 3 dialysis machines. That jewelry you are wearing, that is the reason we don't have enough antibiotics in the pharmacy." David looked around the lobby, addressing every single person watching. "This isn't just fraud," he said. "This is blood money. Every single dollar they stole came directly from the care of our patients. They didn't just steal from a bank account. They stole from the sick. They stole from the dying." I watched Mark. He looked defeated. He looked small. But he didn't look sorry. He just looked sorry he got caught. I looked at the patient, Mr. Henderson, whose chest was rising and falling shallowly. Then I looked at the coffee stain on my shirt. The heat of the burn had faded, but the clarity it brought was sharper than ever. "Mark," I said, my voice low and final, "you didn't just fail as a CEO. You failed as a human being." I turned to the security guards. "Get him out of my sight, and call the police." The silence in the lobby was shattered by the rhythmic, heavy thud of footsteps approaching from the main entrance. It wasn't the frantic running of a guilty man like Mark or the confused shuffling of a crowd. It was the sound of absolute authority. The automatic doors slid open, and Olivia Washington walked in. If David Chen was the heart of this hospital, Olivia was its iron spine. She walked with a stride that could crack pavement. She was wearing a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than Mark's car. Her braids pulled back into an intricate regal bun that highlighted her sharp, uncompromising cheekbones. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked directly at the man who had tried to steal her family's legacy. Flanking her were 4 officers from the Economic Crimes Unit. Their badges caught the light of the chandelier, flashing silver warnings to everyone in the room. Mark looked at Olivia. He had always been terrified of her. He had spent years trying to keep her out of board meetings, calling her aggressive behind her back. But now, as she stopped 3 feet away from him, holding a thick blue legal folder, he looked like he was staring at the Grim Reaper herself. Olivia didn't say a word. She simply nodded to the officers. That small, silent gesture broke Mark completely. The reality of the situation crashed down on him. The fake invoices, the shell company, the stolen millions. It wasn't just a corporate dispute anymore. It was a felony. Mark's legs gave out. He didn't stumble. He collapsed. He dropped to his knees on the hard marble floor right in front of me. The sound of his expensive trousers hitting the stone echoed through the silent lobby. He reached out, grabbing the hem of my coffee-stained shirt with desperate, trembling hands. "Katherine, baby, please," he sobbed, the tears coming freely now. It was a pathetic sight. The man who had strutted through these halls like a king just an hour ago was now groveling at my feet, weeping in front of 300 of his employees. "You have to listen to me," Mark pleaded, his voice cracking. I didn't want to do it. It was her. It was all her idea. He pointed a shaking finger at Tiffany, who was standing frozen near the security desk, watching the police with wide, terrified eyes. "She seduced me," Katherine, Mark cried, tightening his grip on my shirt. "She told me she was pregnant. She told me she needed money or she would go to the press. I was scared. I was trying to protect you. I was trying to protect us." I looked down at him. I looked at the top of his head, at his perfectly styled hair that was now damp with sweat. I listened to the lies spilling out of his mouth. Even in his final moments, he couldn't take responsibility. He had to blame a 22-year-old girl for his own greed. I felt nothing. No love, no hate, no pity, just a profound sense of closure. I reached down and peeled his fingers off my shirt. I did it slowly, methodically, like I was removing a piece of lint. "Don't touch me," I said. My voice was quiet, but it was final. Mark looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. "Katherine, please, we can fix this. I will pay it back. I will fire her. Just don't let them take me. I am your husband." I took the blue folder from Olivia's hand. I didn't need to open it. I knew exactly what was inside. I had signed it 3 days ago in Munich, the moment the private investigators confirmed the wire transfer. "You are not my husband, Mark," I said. I threw the folder onto the floor in front of him. It landed with a heavy slap. "You are a liability." Mark stared at the folder. The bold letters on the cover were visible to everyone standing in the front row. Dissolution of marriage. "And as for your position here," I continued, my voice hardening into steel, "you are fired, effective immediately. Your access to the building is revoked. Your company credit cards have already been canceled, and your car is being towed as we speak." Mark let out a strangled sob, reaching for my hand again, but I stepped back. Olivia stepped forward, her voice booming through the lobby. "Mark Thompson, you are under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny," she announced. The officers moved in. There was no struggle. Mark was too weak to fight. He went limp as they hauled him up from his knees. He looked small between the two burly officers. When they pulled his arms behind his back, the sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was sharp and metallic. Click, click, click. It was the sound of justice. Across the room, Tiffany let out a scream as the other two officers approached her. "No, I didn't know." "He lied to me!" she yelled, backing away until she hit the wall. "You are also under arrest for conspiracy and money laundering." "Ms. Jones," one of the officers said, grabbing her wrist. "I am just an intern," she shrieked, looking at her phone, which was still lying on the floor, still broadcasting. "Help me! Someone help me!" But no one moved. The chat on her live stream was flying by with emojis of handcuffs and judges. Her audience, the people she had tried to impress with her stolen wealth, were now witnessing her absolute ruin. I watched as the officer cuffed her hands behind her back. She was crying hysterically now, her mascara running down her face in black streaks, ruining the Gucci blouse she had been so proud of. Olivia walked over to me. She didn't smile. She just placed a warm, steady hand on my shoulder. "It is done," she whispered. I nodded. I watched the police march Mark and Tiffany toward the exit. Mark tried to look back at me one last time, his eyes filled with regret, but I had already turned away. I looked at David Chen. He was standing by the reception desk, watching the scene with a grim expression. He caught my eye and gave me a small, respectful nod. I took a deep breath. The air in the lobby felt different. The tension was gone, replaced by a sense of shock and relief. The tumor had been removed. The healing could finally begin. I walked over to the reception desk where a young nurse was standing, looking stunned. I picked up the PA system microphone. "Attention, everyone," I said. My voice echoed through the speakers, reaching every floor, every waiting room, every corner of the hospital. "This is Katherine Hayes. Mark Thompson has been removed from his position." I paused, looking around the room at the faces of the staff who had suffered under his incompetence. "We are going to make some changes. Starting today, we are going back to the mission my father started. We are going to put patients before profits, and we are going to treat every single person in this building with respect." I put the microphone down. I looked at the coffee stain on my shirt one last time. It was beginning to dry. It would leave a mark, but marks fade. I turned to Olivia. "Buy me a coffee," I asked. She finally smiled, a fierce, proud smile. "I think you earned a whole pot," she said. As we walked toward the elevators, leaving the sirens and the scandal behind us, I knew that the hardest part was over. I had taken back my name. I had taken back my company. And most importantly, I had taken back my life. I thought that seeing Mark in handcuffs would be the end of it. I thought that the image of him being led away by police, his expensive suit rumpled, and his dignity stripped away, would be the final period on the sentence of our marriage. I was naive. I forgot that in America justice has a price tag, and Mark Thompson had just enough friends left in low places to pay it. 48 hours after his arrest, Mark was out on bail. His lawyers, a team of sharks paid for with the very money he had stolen from my hospital, argued that he was not a flight risk. They painted him as a pillar of the community, a misunderstood executive who had made a clerical error. The judge, a man who played golf at the same club Mark used to frequent, set the bail at $2 million. It was a high sum, but Mark had hidden assets I was still uncovering. He posted it within an hour. I expected him to run. I expected him to take whatever cash he had stuffed in offshore accounts and disappear to a country with no extradition treaty. That would have been the smart move. But Mark was not smart. He was a narcissist. And a narcissist cannot walk away from a fight when his ego has been bruised. He didn't flee. He went to war. He didn't come after me with legal filings or threats of physical violence. He knew those wouldn't work. Instead, he hired a firm known in the dark corners of the corporate world as the Cleaners. They were a digital reputation management team that specialized in one thing: destroying the accuser. The attack didn't start with a scream. It started with a whisper. On a Tuesday morning 3 days after the arrest, I woke up to a notification on my phone. It was a link sent by Olivia. She didn't add any text, just the link. I clicked it. It was an article on a popular gossip site, the kind that trafficked in rumors and blind items. The headline made my blood run cold. The real villain of Apex Medical was the CEO framed by his cheating wife. I sat up in bed, the cold light of the phone screen illuminating the dark room. I read the article. It was a masterpiece of fiction. It claimed that Mark was an innocent victim, a loving husband who had been blindsided by a coup orchestrated by his wife and her secret lover. It claimed that the embezzlement scheme was actually set up by me, Katherine Hayes, to frame Mark so I could divorce him without losing half my fortune. And then they named the lover, Dr. David Chen. I felt a knot of nausea tighten in my stomach. They were dragging David into this. David, who was the most honorable man I knew. David, who had saved a life while Mark was destroying ours. The article was just the beginning. By noon, the internet was on fire. Mark's team had unleashed an army of bots and paid influencers to push the narrative. They didn't just use words. They used pictures. And this was where Mark's cruelty truly shined. He had gone through our old photo albums. He had raided the boxes of memories I kept in the attic looking for ammunition. He found photos from 15 years ago from our days in medical school. He found pictures of me and David. We had been study partners. We were best friends. There were dozens of photos of us together, studying in the library at 2 a.m, eating pizza on the quad, and one specific photo from our graduation day. In the original photo, we were standing in a group of 5 friends, all of us laughing our arms around each other. But Mark's team had cropped the photo. They had cut out everyone else until it was just me and David. In the cropped version, it looked like David was whispering something intimate in my ear while I laughed with my head thrown back. It looked like a moment of secret passion. The caption under the photo on Twitter read, "They have been laughing at him for 15 years. The CEO thought he had a wife. Turns out he was just funding her affair with her college sweetheart. Justice for Mark." It was a lie, a disgusting, twisted lie. But the internet didn't care about context. They saw a picture, they saw a headline, and they made up their minds. I watched the tide turn in real time. The same people who had cheered for me when I fired Mark were now questioning my motives. The comments section, which had been a source of support, became a cesspool of hate. "She played the long game," one user wrote. "She set him up. Look at her face in that photo. She is totally in love with the doctor. Mark never stood a chance." Another comment read, "Typical rich girl. She gets tired of her husband, frames him for a crime, and installs her boyfriend as the new CEO. And we are supposed to believe she is the hero. Open your eyes, people. Mark is the victim here." It was terrifying how easily the truth could be bent. Mark was using the oldest trick in the book, DARVO, deny, attack, and reverse, victim and offender. He was banking on the fact that people love a conspiracy theory more than they love a boring financial audit. Embezzlement is complicated. A love triangle is simple. A love triangle is entertainment. I went to the hospital that afternoon. I had to keep working. I had to show that I wasn't afraid. But the atmosphere had changed. The nurses who had smiled at me yesterday now looked down when I walked past. I could hear the whispers in the cafeteria. I could feel the eyes on my back. "Did you see the photos?" they were asking. "Do you think it is true? Is Dr. Chen really involved?" I walked to David's office. I found him sitting at his desk, staring at his computer screen. He looked tired. He looked aged. He wasn't looking at patient charts. He was looking at a forum thread where strangers were dissecting his personal life, calling him a homewrecker, a gigolo, a fraud. "David," I said, standing in the doorway. He looked up. His eyes were filled with pain, but not for himself, for me. They are saying I prescribed wrong medications on purpose, David said, his voice hollow. They are saying I killed patients to help you boost profits so we could run away together. Katherine, they are reviewing my medical license. The medical board got 1,000 complaints this morning. I walked into the room and closed the door. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. Mark was willing to burn down the reputation of a brilliant doctor just to save his own skin. He didn't care that David saved lives. He only cared that David was a convenient villain. "We will fight this," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "We have the truth. We have the bank records." "Truth is slow," Katherine, David said, shaking his head. "Lies are fast. By the time we prove the bank records are real, my career will be over. Patients are already canceling surgeries. They don't want the killer doctor touching them." He turned his monitor toward me. It was a video of Mark. He was standing on the steps of the courthouse surrounded by microphones. He looked different. He wasn't wearing his power suit. He was wearing a simple sweater and slacks. He looked humble. He looked broken. He had even let a little stubble grow on his chin to look like he hadn't slept. "I just want my life back," Mark was saying to the cameras, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "I loved my wife. I trusted her. I didn't know she was funneling money to him. I signed those papers because I trusted her. I was a fool for love. That is my only crime." The reporters ate it up. They nodded sympathetically. They flashed their cameras. Mark Thompson, the embezzler, the adulterer, the man who hid his mistress, was suddenly the heartbroken hero of a tragedy. I watched the video feeling a cold calm settle over me. It was the same calm I felt when I fired him. He was good. I had to give him that. He was a sociopath, but he was a talented one. He knew exactly which buttons to push to make the world hate a powerful woman. But he had made one mistake, one critical error that he couldn't see because he was too focused on his own reflection. He thought this smear campaign would break me. He thought it would make me hide. He thought that by dragging David into the mud, he would force us apart. He didn't realize that he had just given me the weapon I needed to destroy him completely. By bringing up the past, by digging into our history, he had opened a door he should have kept locked. He wanted to talk about secrets. He wanted to talk about what really happened 15 years ago. Fine. I turned away from the screen and looked at David. "He wants a story, David," I said. "He wants a scandal." David looked at me confused by the shift in my tone. "Let's give him one," I said. "But let's tell the whole story, including the part he left out." I pulled out my phone and dialed Olivia. "Get the legal team ready," I told her, "and call the press, not the gossip blogs, the real press. We are holding a press conference." When Olivia asked, "Tomorrow morning," I said. "Mark wants to talk about family. He wants to talk about hidden truths. So let's talk about the child he abandoned 5 years ago. Let's see how his family man image holds up when the world meets his son." I hung up the phone. Mark thought he had won the news cycle. He thought he had turned the public against me. He was about to learn that internet fame is fleeting, but DNA is forever. The smear campaign was annoying. It was painful. But it was just noise, and I was about to drop a bomb that would silence it for good. The fallout wasn't just digital, it was financial. Wall Street hates uncertainty, and Mark had just turned my company into a soap opera. By the time the markets opened on Wednesday morning, Apex Medical Group was trending for all the wrong reasons. I sat in my office watching the Bloomberg terminal on my screen. The line that represented my family's legacy was plummeting. It was a sea of red. My phone hadn't stopped ringing for 6 hours. The board members, the same men who had congratulated me on my strength just days ago, were now panicking. They were seeing their portfolios shrink and they wanted a head on a platter. They didn't care about the truth. They didn't care that Mark was a criminal. They only cared that the stock price was down 12%. They wanted stability. And right now the narrative was that the chairwoman was embroiled in a sex scandal with the interim CEO. "Get rid of him," one investor screamed at me over the phone. "I don't care if he is the best cardiologist in New York. He is poison, Katherine. Fire Dr. Chen, issue a public apology to Mark, and maybe we can salvage the quarter." I hung up the phone without saying a word. I stared out the window at the Manhattan skyline. The city looked gray and hostile. The door to my office opened. I didn't turn around. I knew who it was by the hesitation in the footsteps. David walked in. He didn't look like the warrior who had confronted Mark in the lobby. He looked defeated. His shoulders were slumped and the spark in his eyes was gone. He was holding a single sheet of crisp white paper. He walked to my desk and placed the paper in front of me. He didn't sit down. "I think this is for the best," David said, his voice quiet and resigned. I looked down at the paper. It was a letter of resignation. It was brief, professional, and completely heartbreaking. He was offering to step down as interim CEO and resign from his position as head of cardiology effective immediately. "They are right, Katherine." David continued, seeing that I wasn't reaching for the paper. "I am a liability. If I stay, the stock keeps dropping. If I leave, maybe the heat dies down. You can save the hospital. You can save your reputation." I looked at his hands. They were the hands of a surgeon, steady and capable, now clenched into fists at his sides. He was willing to throw away his entire career, everything he had worked for since we were 20 years old, just to protect me from the storm my husband had created. I stood up. The leather chair creaked behind me. I picked up the letter. I held it in both hands, feeling the weight of the decision. "Is this what you want?" I asked him. "No," David whispered. "But it is what needs to happen." I looked him in the eye. I saw the pain there. I saw the shame of being accused of something he hadn't done. I took a deep breath. Then slowly and deliberately, I tore the paper down the middle. The sound of the ripping paper was loud in the silent office. David's eyes went wide. I put the two halves together and tore them again and again, until the resignation letter was nothing but confetti. I let the pieces flutter down onto the desk. "You are not going anywhere, David," I said, my voice finding that cold iron strength that Mark feared so much. "But the investors—" David started. "Screw the investors," I cut him off. "They are scared because they are blind. They think this is a scandal. I know it is a war. And you don't win a war by sacrificing your best general." I walked around the desk and stood in front of him. "An innocent tree doesn't die just because the wind blows, David. We have done nothing wrong. If you resign now, you are admitting guilt. You are letting Mark win. You are telling the world that his lies are stronger than our truth." I pointed to the door. "We are not hiding. We are not resigning. Mark wants to play a game of secrets. Fine. We are going to play our hand face up. I checked my watch. Go home and get some sleep, David, and put on your best suit, because tomorrow morning we aren't just saving your job, we are burying Mark Thompson." The black SUV wound its way out of the polished steel canyons of Manhattan, leaving the world of hedge funds and luxury high-rises behind. We were heading north, crossing the bridge into a part of the city that men like Mark pretended didn't exist. The scenery changed rapidly. The manicured parks and doormen were replaced by crumbling brick facades, barred windows, and the relentless gray of concrete that hadn't seen repair in decades. I sat in the back seat next to Olivia. She was reviewing a file on her tablet, her face illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. "Are you sure about this address?" I asked, watching a group of teenagers eyeing our expensive car with suspicion from a street corner. "Positive." Olivia said, not looking up. The private investigator tracked the last known payment Mark made. It was 5 years ago, a check for $5,000 and a non-disclosure agreement signed in a coffee shop. After that, nothing. He erased them. I looked out the window. Mark had spent the last week on television talking about family values. He had wept on camera about how much he wanted to be a father, about how I had denied him that chance because I was too focused on my career. The public ate it up. They saw a grieving potential dad. I saw a monster. We pulled up to a tenement building in the South Bronx. The front door was propped open with a cinder block. The buzzer system was ripped out of the wall, exposing colorful wires like exposed veins. It was a place where dreams went to die, and it was exactly where Mark Thompson had hid his secrets. We got out of the car. The air smelled of exhaust and damp cardboard. Olivia signaled for our security detail to stay back. This wasn't a raid. It was a conversation. We walked up 4 flights of stairs because the elevator had an out-of-order sign taped to it that looked yellow with age. The hallway on the 4th floor was dim lit by a single flickering fluorescent bulb. We stopped at apartment 4B. I knocked. The sound was hollow against the thin wood. Inside, I heard the sound of a television being turned down. Footsteps approached. The peephole darkened as someone looked through. "Who is it?" a woman's voice asked. She sounded guarded, tired. "My name is Katherine Hayes," I said through the door. "I am Mark Thompson's wife." There was a long silence. I could hear the woman breathing on the other side. She was debating whether to open the door or call the police. Or maybe she was just debating whether she had the energy to deal with the ghost of her past. "I am not here to hurt you," I added. "I am here to make him pay." The lock clicked, then the deadbolt. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a woman who looked like she had lived 1,000 lifetimes in 30 years. She was beautiful in a worn-out, fragile way. She had dark curls tied back in a messy bun and eyes that held a deep, simmering resentment. She was wearing a faded waitress uniform, looking like she had just come off a double shift. "Elena?" I asked. She nodded, leaning against the doorframe, blocking our view of the apartment. "I saw you on the news," Elena said, her voice raspy. "You are the one who fired him." "I am," I said. "And now he is trying to destroy me. He is telling the world he is a victim. He is telling the world he is a good man." Elena let out a bitter, sharp laugh. It was a sound void of humor. "A good man," she repeated, shaking her head. "He told me he was a good man too, right before he changed his number." "Can we come in?" Olivia asked gently. Elena hesitated. She looked at our clothes, my tailored blazer, Olivia's expensive suit. We were reminders of the world Mark lived in, the world he had promised her before he discarded her like trash. "I don't want money," Elena said, her chin lifting slightly. "I don't want his money. I don't want your money. We are surviving." "I know," I said. "I don't want to buy your silence, Elena. I want to give you a voice." She searched my eyes for a moment, looking for the lie. When she didn't find one, she stepped back and opened the door wider. The apartment was tiny. It was clean, but poverty has a specific look that cleanliness can't hide. The furniture was mismatched, the curtains were thin, but there were toys everywhere. Plastic trucks, a stack of coloring books, a superhero cape draped over a chair. And then I saw him. Sitting at the small kitchen table, coloring in a book with intense concentration, was a little boy. He looked up as we entered. My heart stopped. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was a mirror image. He had Mark's nose. He had the same shape of the eyes. He even held the crayon the same way Mark held a pen, with a slight peculiar tilt of the wrist. He was about 5 years old, innocent and wide-eyed, staring at the strangers in his kitchen. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. Mark had stood on a podium yesterday and told millions of people that he wanted children more than anything. And here was his son living in a walk-up in the Bronx wearing a T-shirt that was 2 sizes too big, while his father lived in a penthouse 3 miles away. "This is Leo," Elena said, walking over to the boy and placing a protective hand on his shoulder. "Leo," I whispered. "He doesn't know him," Elena said quickly, her voice fierce. "He thinks his father died in the army. I told him he was a hero. I didn't have the heart to tell him his father is a coward who paid me $5,000 to get an abortion and then blocked my number when I refused." I looked at Leo. He smiled at me shyly. "Hi," he said. "Hello, Leo," I managed to say, my voice trembling. I turned to Elena. The rage I had felt for the last week solidified into something cold and hard and unbreakable. This wasn't about stock prices anymore. This wasn't about my reputation. This was about a little boy who had been erased because he didn't fit Mark's corporate aesthetic. "Mark is trying to ruin Dr. Chen," I told Elena. "He is trying to ruin me. But more importantly, he is lying to the world about who he is. He is using his desire for a family as a shield." I walked over to the table and knelt down so I was eye level with Leo. He went back to coloring, unbothered by the adult conversation. "Does he know about Leo?" I asked Elena, looking up at her. "He knows," Elena spat. "I sent him a photo when Leo was born. He sent back a cease and desist letter from his lawyer. He said if I ever contacted him again, he would ruin me. He called Leo a mistake." I stood up. I looked at Olivia. She was already taking notes on her tablet, her face set in grim determination. "We have the DNA test results from the spoon he used at the gala last month," Olivia said quietly. "We just need a sample from the boy to confirm. But looking at him, I don't think the jury will need a test." Elena looked panic-stricken. I'm not going to court. I can't afford a lawyer. Mark will crush me. He won't crush you, I said, taking Elena's hands in mine. Her hands were rough, calloused from hard work. He is not going to sue you, Elena, because by the time we are done with him, he won't be able to afford a lawyer either. I looked around the small, cramped apartment. Pack a bag, I said. What Elena asked. You are not staying here tonight, I said. Mark is desperate. If he finds out we were here, he might try to scare you. I have a secure location, a house in the Hamptons. It has security. It has a yard. Leo can run around. Elena looked at Leo, then back at me. She looked tired of fighting alone. Why are you doing this? She asked. He cheated on you too. Why help his mistress? I squeezed her hands. Because he made us enemies, Elena. He thought that if he kept us separate, if he pitted women against each other, he would always win. But he forgot one thing. I looked at Leo, the secret weapon that would bring down the king. He forgot that mothers protect their children, and women protect the truth. I pulled a business card from my pocket. It wasn't my corporate card, it was my personal number. Tomorrow morning I am holding a press conference, I said. I want you to be there. You don't have to say a word if you don't want to. Just stand next to me. Just let the world see Leo. Elena looked at her son. She brushed a curl of hair off his forehead. She took a deep breath, the breath of a woman who has been holding it for 5 years. I will do it, she whispered. For Leo. I nodded. Good, I said. I turned to Olivia. Call the press, I said. Tell them the story about the poor, childless Mark Thompson is about to get a sequel. As we walked out of the apartment, leaving the door open for Elena to pack, I felt a strange sense of peace. Mark had tried to bury me with lies. I was going to bury him with the one thing he couldn't spin, couldn't bribe, and couldn't hide. I was going to bury him with his own son. The press conference was held in the main auditorium of the hospital, a room usually reserved for medical breakthroughs and donor galas. Today it felt like a coliseum. The air was heavy, suffocatingly hot from the hundreds of bodies packed into the space. Every major news network was there. Cameras were jammed tripod to tripod, their red recording lights looking like hundreds of unblinking eyes waiting for blood. I stood backstage watching the feed on a monitor. The noise was deafening. It wasn't just reporters, it was the public. Mark's smear campaign had worked too well. There were protesters outside the hospital gates holding signs that said, "Justice for Mark and fire the cheater." They wanted a villain, and for the last 48 hours, Mark had successfully cast me in that role. Then the side door of the auditorium opened. A hush fell over the room, followed immediately by a frantic explosion of camera shutters. Mark walked in. He wasn't invited. He had no business being here, but he walked in with the confidence of a man who believes he has already won. He was wearing a dark blue sweater, looking pale and somber. He walked slowly, acknowledging the reporters, with a sad, weary nod, playing the part of the grieving husband to perfection. He took a seat in the front row right in the center. He crossed his legs, folded his hands in his lap, and looked up at the empty podium with a look of righteous expectation. He was daring us to speak. He was here to watch us burn. I looked at David standing next to me in the wings. He was wearing his best suit, a navy blue that matched the dark circles under his eyes. He looked terrified, not for himself, but for what this might do to the hospital. "Are you ready?" I asked him. David straightened his tie. He looked out at Mark, sitting there like a vulture waiting to feast. "Let's finish this," David said. We walked out onto the stage. The sound was physical. A wall of noise hit us. Questions were shouted from every direction. "Is it true? Did you frame him? How long have you been sleeping together?" I walked to the podium, my face completely impassive. I didn't raise my hand for silence. I didn't smile. I just stood there and waited. Eventually, the room quieted down, the curiosity overpowering the aggression. Mark looked up at me. He offered a small, sad smile, the kind that said, "I forgive you for destroying me." It was the most infuriating thing I had ever seen. I stepped back and gestured for David to take the microphone. Mark sat up straighter. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He expected David to stammer. He expected a denial that would sound like a lie. He expected us to crumble under the weight of the rumors he had manufactured. David gripped the sides of the podium. His knuckles were white. He looked out at the sea of faces, and then he looked directly at Mark. For the past 3 days, David began his voice low but steady. My character has been dissected on every news channel in the country. You have called me a fraud. You have called me a homewrecker. You have said that I conspired to steal this hospital because I was blinded by lust. The room was silent. Mark's smile widened slightly. He was enjoying this. You want to know the truth? David asked. You want to know if I have feelings for Katherine Hayes? David paused. He took a breath that seemed to rattle in his chest. The answer is yes. A collective gasp ripped through the auditorium. The reporters looked at each other stunned. Mark actually laughed. It was a short, sharp sound of triumph. He slapped his knee. He looked around at the cameras, mouthing the words, "I told you so." He had won. We had just handed him the victory on a silver platter. I have loved Katherine Hayes for 15 years. David continued, his voice rising over the murmur of the crowd. Since the day we met in anatomy class, I loved her intelligence. I loved her drive. I loved her more than I have ever loved anyone. Mark was beaming. He looked ready to stand up and take a bow. His narrative was confirmed. We were the villains. But David said the word cutting through the air like a whip. Mark's smile faltered. But I never told her, David said. I never touched her. I never crossed the line. Not once. Not ever. The room went quiet again. Because love isn't about possession, David said, staring hard at Mark. Love is about respect. When Katherine married Mark, I stepped back. I didn't try to steal her. I didn't try to sabotage her marriage. I stayed at this hospital working 18-hour shifts, missing holidays, sacrificing my own personal life because I wanted to support her legacy. David leaned into the microphone. I watched Mark Thompson treat her like an accessory for 10 years. I watched him take credit for her work. I watched him isolate her, and I stayed silent because I respected her choice. My love was a shield, not a weapon. I loved her enough to let her be happy even if it wasn't with me. David pointed a finger at Mark. You don't know what love is, Mark. You think love is ownership. You think love is a transaction. You accuse me of an affair because you cannot conceive of a man supporting a woman without getting something in return. You are projecting your own selfishness onto me. Mark's face had changed. The smugness was gone, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. This wasn't the script he had written. David wasn't apologizing. He was claiming the moral high ground. I am not the villain here, David said, his voice ringing with conviction. And Katherine is not the villain. We are just two people who care about this hospital. And we are the only ones standing between it and a thief who would burn it down for a payout. David stepped back from the podium. He looked drained, but he stood tall. The reporters were frantically typing. The narrative was shifting. It wasn't a sordid affair anymore. It was a tragedy of unrequited loyalty. But Mark wasn't done. He stood up. He realized he was losing the room and he needed to make a scene. This is touching, Mark shouted from the front row, turning to face the cameras. Really it is. A beautiful speech. But it doesn't change the facts. You two conspired to frame me. You needed me out of the way so you could finally be together. You are criminals. He turned to me, his eyes wild. Katherine, tell them the truth. Tell them how you planned this. You are a cold, heartless woman who cares about nothing but money. You don't know the first thing about family. I walked to the podium. I adjusted the microphone. I looked at my husband. He was red in the face, sweating, pointing his finger at me. He looked desperate. You want to talk about family, Mark? I asked. Yes, Mark yelled. I wanted a family. I wanted children. And you denied me that because you were too busy being a boss. You are the one who destroyed our home. I stared at him for a long moment. The silence stretched out heavy and unbearable. That is an interesting story, Mark, I said. The grieving father who never was, the victim of a barren wife. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small remote control. But if you wanted a child so badly, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, why did you throw yours away? I pressed the button. The massive screen behind me, which had been black until now, flickered to life. It wasn't a spreadsheet, it wasn't a bank statement, it was a document. A DNA test result from a lab in New York, dated yesterday. The red stamp on the bottom read 99.99% match. And next to the document was a photograph. It was a high-resolution picture of a little boy sitting on a stoop in the Bronx. He was wearing tattered sneakers and a jacket that was too thin for the winter weather. He was looking at the camera with big brown eyes, Mark's eyes. The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the auditorium. Mark froze. He looked at the screen. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He blinked rapidly, his brain trying to process the impossible. He had buried this secret 5 years ago. He had paid for it to disappear. I pointed at the screen. "This is Leo," I said. Mark shook his head. "No," he whispered. That is fake." "It is not fake, Mark," I said, "and you know it, because 5 years ago you wrote a check for $5,000 to a woman named Elena. You made her sign a non-disclosure agreement in a Starbucks. You told her to get rid of it. You told her that if she ever contacted you again, you would destroy her life." I looked out at the reporters. Mark Thompson says he is a victim. He says he wants a family. But 5 years ago, when his son was born, he didn't buy a crib. He bought a lawyer. I clicked the remote again. A split screen appeared. On the left was the photo of Leo in his worn-out clothes. On the right was a photo of Tiffany carrying her $10,000 Birkin bag. "I want you to look at these two pictures," I said to the room. "On the right we have the mistress. Mark spent $50,000 on her in the last month alone. He bought her bags, jewelry, first-class flights." I pointed to the left. "And here is his son. Leo lives in a one-bedroom apartment with his mother who works 2 jobs. Leo eats school lunch because it is the only hot meal he gets. Leo has never met his father." I looked down at Mark. He had collapsed back into his chair. He wasn't acting anymore. He was gray. He was shaking. "You cut off your own flesh and blood to buy diamond earrings for a stranger," Mark Weiss said, my voice trembling with disgust. "You claim I am cold. You claim I don't understand family." I leaned over the podium, staring directly into his soul. "I found them yesterday. I went to the Bronx. I met your son. He is a sweet, intelligent boy who thinks his father died a hero in the war because his mother loves him too much to tell him the truth. She loves him too much to tell him that his father is a coward who traded him for a sports car." Mark put his head in his hands. The reporters were on their feet. They weren't taking pictures of me anymore. They were taking pictures of him. They were shouting questions at him, their voices laced with judgment and revulsion. "How could you? Is it true? Why did you abandon him?" The internet, which had been defending him all morning, turned instantly. I could see the live feed on the monitor. The comments were scrolling so fast they were a blur. "Monster, deadbeat. He left his kid, lock him up. The tide hadn't just turned, it had crashed down on him. There is no spin for abandoning a child. There is no PR strategy that fixes a hungry 5-year-old boy." Mark's mask of the victim had been ripped off, revealing the ugly, selfish rot underneath. I signaled to the side of the stage. Elena walked out. She was holding Leo's hand. She looked terrified of the cameras, but she walked with her head high. She stood next to me. Mark looked up through his fingers. He saw Elena. He saw the woman he had discarded. And he saw the boy. Leo looked at the man in the front row. He didn't know who he was. He just saw a man crying. I put my arm around Elena. "We are establishing a trust fund for Leo today," I announced. "Not with stolen money, with my money. He will have the education and the life his father tried to steal from him." I looked at Mark one last time. "You are done, Mark. You have lost your job. You have lost your reputation. And now the world knows exactly what kind of man you are." I turned away from the podium. "Come on, Leo," I said gently. "Let's go get some ice cream." As we walked off the stage, leaving Mark Thompson alone in the glare of the flashbulbs, surrounded by the wreckage of his own lies, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. The truth is a brutal weapon, but it is the only one that matters. And for the first time in a long time, the air in the hospital felt fresh. The trial lasted 3 weeks, but the jury only needed 2 hours to decide the fate of the man who had tried to steal my legacy. I sat in the front row of the courtroom, directly behind the prosecution table. I wanted Mark to feel my presence. I wanted him to know that I wasn't hiding. When the foreman read the verdict, Mark didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just slumped forward as if his strings had finally been cut. Guilty on all counts: embezzlement, wire fraud, tax evasion. The judge was a woman who had zero tolerance for men who used their families as shields for their crimes. She looked over her glasses at Mark and delivered a sentence that echoed through the silent courtroom: 10 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. As the bailiffs led him away, Mark turned to look at me one last time. His eyes were empty. The arrogance was gone. The charm was gone. All that was left was a terrified man realizing he would spend the next decade in a concrete cell. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I simply watched him disappear behind the heavy oak doors, closing the book on the darkest chapter of my life. Tiffany Jones didn't fare much better. She avoided prison time by testifying against Mark, but her punishment was perhaps even worse for someone so obsessed with image. The university expelled her immediately for violating their code of ethics, but the real sentence came from society. The internet, which she had tried to weaponize against me, turned on her with ruthless efficiency. She became a pariah. She couldn't walk down the street without people pointing and whispering. She was the face of greed. Last I heard, she had moved to a small town in Ohio where nobody knew her name. She was working as a waitress in a diner, scrubbing tables and serving coffee to strangers. The irony wasn't lost on me. The girl who had thrown a latte at me because she thought she was a queen was now serving them for minimum wage just to pay off her legal debts. Justice isn't always a gavel. Sometimes it is just gravity pulling you back down to earth. 3 years have passed since that day. Apex Medical Group looks very different now. We stripped the gold plating off the lobby walls. We sold the executive private jet. We took all that money and poured it into what matters. We opened a free clinic for the uninsured. We bought brand new MRI machines for every department. We became the top-rated hospital in New York, not for profits, but for patient care. And the man sitting in the CEO's chair isn't a businessman in a fancy suit. It is Dr. David Chen. He still wears his white coat. He still does rounds every morning. He runs this hospital with a stethoscope in one hand and a budget report in the other, proving that you can be successful without losing your soul. I walked into the main lobby this morning. The sunlight was streaming through the glass, illuminating the spot where Tiffany had collided with me 3 years ago. The stain on the floor is long gone. The memory of the humiliation has faded, replaced by the hum of a busy healing hospital. I saw David sitting on a bench near the entrance holding 2 paper cups. He saw me and smiled. It wasn't the guarded smile of a secret admirer anymore. It was the open, warm smile of a partner. I sat down next to him. He handed me a coffee. Black, no sugar, just the way I like it. We didn't say anything for a long time. We just watched the people come and go. We watched families hugging. We watched doctors rushing to save lives. We watched the legacy of my father thriving in hands that actually cared about it. You know, David said, looking at his cup, I used to hate this lobby. Why, I asked, taking a sip. Because every time I walked through here, I saw you leaving to go home to him, David said softly. I used to wish I could just stop you, just for a minute. He reached out and took my hand. His palm was warm. His grip was steady. I don't have to wish anymore, he said. I looked at our joined hands. I looked at the man who had waited 15 years, the man who had risked his career to defend my honor, the man who loved me not for my money, but for my mind. Mark had tried to destroy me. He had tried to take everything, but in his greed he had stripped away all the dead weight in my life. He had forced me to see who was real and who was fake. He had cleared the path for me to find the happiness I had been too blind to see. I squeezed David's hand. No, I said, smiling, you don't. We sat there finishing our coffee in peace. No cameras, no drama, just 2 people who had walked through the fire and came out holding hands on the other side. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But I disagree. The best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It is living a life so full, so bright, and so magnificent that they become irrelevant. Mark is sitting in a cell thinking about the past. I am sitting here in the sunlight building the future. That is the ultimate victory. Do you believe that true love is worth waiting for? Do you think David was right to wait 15 years for Katherine? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story of justice and patience inspired you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of truth winning over lies. See you in the next one.